And we are live. Hello everybody, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to something that we're calling for the month of November, Wednesday Writers Club. It is very similar to classic Reedsy Live, where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today is no exception. We have a fantastic editor from here on the Reedsy Marketplace, Katie Seaman, who will come in and be talking about dialogue, the thing that can sort of make or break your book in terms of drawing readers into it. It's something that we always have a lot of people ask questions about, and Katie's going to clear up some of the basic stuff, dip into some more advanced bits, and we're going to have some time at the end to field your questions in our Q&A section. But yes, who here is here working on Reedsy's 2025 Novel Sprint Challenge? That's where we're inviting you to write 50,000 words in 30 days for a chance to unlock some rewards and win prizes. Brooks Weaver is saying that their manuscript is currently in developmental editing phase. Oh, they found an editor on Reedsy. Fantastic. They are working on the second book in the trilogy. Wonderful. Paul Fraser's here. What else is everyone working on? Vicious261 is coming in from Austin. Ice Detection 89 from Fort Lauderdale, Lewis. We have Rebecca Buchanan from Kansas taking part in the writing sprint. Gary Jones tuning in from South Carolina. John from Newcastle, wonderful. Susan Pullman from Phoenix, I presume Phoenix, Arizona. I, myself, am currently in Las Vegas, Nevada in the US of A, attending a publishing conference here. As you can tell, it's a bit of a hotel room. It is warm outside, it is dry. I'm not used to sort of such dry weather. I'm having to actually moisturize my hands, which is not something I often have to do. Karen is here from Brantford, Ontario. Hello. John from Guernsey has turned up. We have Janice from Napa. Rebecca Harris from Victoria, Australia. Thank you for waking up and joining us for that one. This should be a fantastic one. Before we start, if anyone would like to preemptively give this video a thumbs up, perhaps subscribe to our channel, that always helps spread the good word. Yes, we have just a few more minutes before the promised time. So yeah, let me know if you are taking part in the challenge, how you're doing. You don't have to necessarily share your progress, but if you want to, you can do. It is 5 days through there, so I guess 1/6 through the challenge. If you're going equally, maybe you should be looking down at the 8,000 word mark at this point. Death Knowledge says almost finished with their first draft, but definitely need some assistance with writing dialogue. Well, you're in the right place. Mary is here from Las Illes, France. Illes. I have to check my pronunciation guide. Francis from Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. Susan from Portland. A Heart and Life is just finishing their first YA fantasy novel about their homeland and its lore. Oh, from Sabah in Borneo. Fantastic. I've been there a few times. My father was a flying doctor in Sabah, and they lived in Kota Kinabalu. Also went on a school trip to Sarawak, which is not quite the same, but sort of on the same stretch of coast. But a lot of very exciting, sort of unique cultures there on Borneo. Michael Higgins from Los Angeles. Giada Rizzo from Italy, welcome. Suzanne from London turning their screenplay into a novel. Fantastic challenge. All right, it is now 11 a.m. here in Las Vegas, which means 7 p.m. Back home in the UK, probably about 2 p.m. on the East Coast. Let's get things started. There we go. Hello, and welcome to Reedsy's Novel Sprint Challenge 2025 and Writers... let me start that again. Welcome to Wednesday Writers Club. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday Writers Club here as a part of Reedsy's Novel Sprint Challenge 2025. My name is Martin. I'm coming to you here from not my home, but Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm so glad that you can join us either live or on the replay as we bring on a guest today to talk to us about one of our most popular, most requested topics, and that is dialogue. If you are new to Reedsy, welcome. It's not always like this, but for the month of November, we've invited people to log into Reedsy Studio and write 50,000 words in 30 days. And judging by everyone, mixed progress. But I think the most important thing is that everyone is sitting down and getting some writing done. So if that is you, well done, congratulations, and keep on going. There's a lot to get through. So let me please introduce our guest, who has over a decade experience working for some of the biggest publishers in the world. She can now be found on Reedsy, where you can work with her to sharpen your book into a potential bestseller. Please welcome Katie Seaman. Katie, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat to everyone today about dialogue. I know it's a subject that gets a lot of readers asking questions and writers too.
Cool. We were just talking before this thing went on. In the UK today, it's Guy Fawkes night, so there's a lot of fireworks going off.
Yeah, I apologise if anyone can hear the fireworks. It's like I've got my own hype energy with the fireworks. So yeah, I'm sorry if anyone hears that. Hopefully it won't be too distracting during our talk tonight.
Just from my perspective on before, I was worried because when I first heard it, I assumed someone was knocking down your door. So no need, hopefully, to panic, to worry for Katie's safety. Is all happening outside. But you have sent a slide deck. I'll be behind the scenes answering any questions on there, and then we'll be back for a Q&A at the end. Katie, let me know if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll see you at the end.
Great, brilliant. Well, thanks so much everyone for joining us today. I hope that today's session is really going to help you feel like you can master dialogue. So today we're going to start off by recapping some of the basics about good dialogue formatting. We'll talk about some of the ingredients that make up good dialogue with examples, as well as giving you some tips on how to edit your own dialogue and avoid common pitfalls. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me and my background. So as Martin said, I worked for over a decade at major publishers over here in the UK. There's a little snapshot of authors that I've worked with, and you can of course find out more about me on my Reedsy profile on the marketplace. But I thought a great place to start for our session today would actually be this quote from Stephen King, an absolute titan of the literary world. And if anyone hasn't read already, I'd strongly recommend his book On Writing, a Memoir of Craft, which is filled with amazing bits of advice. And his quote here: "Writing good dialogue is art as well as craft." Well, why is dialogue important? Good dialogue elevates your storytelling and it helps bring the story to life, really immersing a reader in the world you created. But I think this quote here really does it justice, because the best dialogue, of course, is crafted. And while you want the dialogue to sound natural and how people talk in real life, super realistic dialogue might not always be the most engaging for a reader on the page. And I'm thinking, for example, if we always see characters always greeting each other, asking how the other one is at the beginning, things like that can really slow the pace and will be quite mundane. So you can really skip the social niceties and take for granted that the reader can fill in those gaps. So before we get into some of the ingredients that make dialogue really engaging, I wanted to take a minute just to recap the basics that hopefully will stand you in good stead. As Martin said, I know many of you are doing Reedsy Novel Sprint this month, and I hope that's going well for you so far. So whether you are new to writing or you are a veteran, I hope that just recapping these small tips to bear in mind will help you feel more confident when writing dialogue on the page. So the first thing to remember is use quotation marks for dialogue. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I think especially Sally Rooney is the one that springs to mind. But using quotation marks as part of the dialogue makes it immediately clear that there is speech. It helps the reader easily follow a conversation as well when you have a new speaker on a new line. Just like a script, it's very easy to scan sequentially. We'll talk about dialogue tags a little bit more later in our talk this evening. And I know this is something that there is varying advice online. It's a bit of a Marmite topic. But the one thing to remember with dialogue tags is that it helps make it clear who is speaking. It can also reflect intonation too, and you can use body language or action beats to make your dialogue feel more dynamic and that natural quality we've talked about, even though it is, of course, crafted. And I always say that dialogue is like a game of tennis because you want it to have that back and forth. It should be an action and then a reaction. So you want to avoid characters speaking in monologue and feeling like they're talking at you, just like I am today. So this is an example of what not to do in your own dialogue. The best dialogue on the page will always have somebody to bounce off, and it will feel like characters are reacting to what the other one says. So I hope, just as a little recap, that is some top tips just to remind you of some of the gold standard basics when it comes to formatting dialogue on the page. So we've talked about this already. What makes good dialogue? Well, there's a few things. So for today's session, I've focused on 6 key areas to help elevate you when crafting dialogue. I've tried to keep a real mix of genres on the slides and the examples that I've picked, so hopefully they will be as useful as possible for everyone that has taken the time to join us here today. So firstly, your dialogue needs to fit the tone and the setting of the book you're writing. And to illustrate this point, there's a short excerpt from Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes just to read over that. And as you're reading over that, hopefully you'll be able to see that immediately there is a formality to the tone of the character's speech. There's references to societal obligations. I think hopefully it would be really clear that this is historical fiction, even without the cover or the title there to guide you. And that is because the book is really in keeping with the tone. The kind of speech patterns and rhythm to the speech sounds like it belongs in a period drama. So it doesn't matter what genre you're writing in, the first tip to what makes good dialogue is always to have something that feels appropriate for your book, fitting the tone and genre. So I hope that that is the first thing to bear in mind that will really help moving forward. And the second thing that you want to make sure that dialogue does is we always need dialogue to have a purpose. It needs to advance the plot. Now, I picked David Nicholls. I knew as soon as I was doing this talk that I had to include David Nicholls because he is one of my favourite writers. He's also an author I often recommend to writers I'm working with as an example of someone who is gold standard at dialogue. And one of the reasons for that is probably because David Nicholls started out as an actor and he's worked extensively as a screenwriter, so he has a great ear for dialogue. And in this example from One Day, you can see how he uses the scene to help move forward the will they won't they romance between Emma and Dex. It's really simple in its language. There's the use of the ellipsis as Emma hesitates before looking up at Dex, which reflects the natural body language. But most importantly, this is a conversation with Emma thinking she had moved on from Dexter, only for him to assert his feelings for her and that she can't get rid of him that easily. So it really sets up the next chapter of their love story, propelling the plot forward, which is done best through this dialogue. So again, this isn't just filler, it's serving a vital point in terms of the plot, which is why it works so well. And then the third tip to bear in mind when it comes to good dialogue is that you really want dialogue to convey the emotions of the character. I thought Pachinko was actually a really interesting example to pick because for all the talk about dialogue tags and how to use those effectively in writing, this one doesn't use any. But it's actually really clever. And I think Min Jin Lee is able to convey so much emotion here with the reader filling in the gaps. The M dashes work really well to show the hesitation and pauses in the dialogue. And it's because it's clear that it's such a difficult subject for the characters to be speaking about that they're struggling to voice what they feel. This is a really good example of how sometimes less can be more when it comes to dialogue. And ultimately, this dialogue is very powerful because it conveys relatable emotions in a very understated way, where we understand the depth of the characters' feelings and also the backstory between them. So however you choose to do that, whether it is through dialogue tags, whether it is actually through hesitations and body language, really make sure that your dialogue conveys emotion, because that will make it very engaging and relatable to the reader. And when we're talking about characters too, it's really important that characters are differentiated through their speech so that not every person sounds the same. And Charles Dickens was one of the first writers to do this so well, especially with the supporting characters in his novels. And they were populated with larger than life characters who were normally from the East End or different, often poorer classes than the working class. So here in this extract, we have Oliver meeting the Artful Dodger, Jack Dawkins. And you can immediately see from the dialogue on the page the contrasting personalities that Artful Dodger and Oliver have. You can see from the Cockney slang that I'm not going to attempt to read out loud. I will spare you my poor acting. But you will see immediately that the Artful Dodger speaks in those colloquialisms, there's the Cockney slang, and that is contrasted with Oliver, who is quieter in his speech. He speaks more formally, which immediately establishes his different background. If you were to also read these aloud, you can hear that Dodger's dialogue again has more of a natural bounce to it, which shows his lively personality, while again Oliver is milder and quieter and more insular. And by the end of this extract, we see Oliver as someone who is more naive, whereas Dodger is street smart. And that is because of the misunderstanding that you'll see, where when Artful Dodger talks about a beak, Oliver thinks he's talking about a bird, where he's actually talking about a magistrate. So again, it's really simply and effectively done, but you get two very distinct personalities on the page. And that again is something that dialogue can do really well. It can help you to convey a personality and even relationships between characters, which I think this is also starting to do here, because we see Oliver and Artful Dodger, we see a power dynamic that's going to come into play later in the novel too. So that's something to bear in mind, that dialogue can be a great way to show a character's personality, to set up relationships, to also show how that changes throughout your novel too. So I hope this is a fun example that might be familiar to some people already. And sometimes with dialogue, we're obviously talking a lot about what is said. I think dialogue can be really interesting when we read between the lines. And it's not about what's said necessarily, but it's about the subtext. So I think the best dialogue does this well. I picked Sally Thorne's The Hating Game for anybody that hasn't read or isn't familiar with it, because it has been adapted into a film. This is a book that is filled with verbal sparring throughout between the two main characters, Lucy and Josh, as romance developed between them. And this example, I think, is brilliant to show how important subtext is. So in this scene, when Lucy is quizzed by a colleague about what's going on between her and Josh, she denies anything is happening. But as you can see on the page, she begins to swig her coffee to deflect, and we can see how uncomfortable she feels, which is hinting that there are more feelings under the surface than she wants to let on at this point. We get the sense that, everything's too hot. The coffee's too hot. She's too hot. She feels like she's beginning to drown, even though as she's talking to the other character, she pretends everything is fine. So in terms of how to elevate your dialogue, hopefully, again, this is another great example of sometimes it's not about what's said, but actually the reactions of the character, hinting at things that might be going on beneath the surface. That can be used in a romance novel to develop intrigue and to develop chemistry. In a crime thriller novel, it could help deepen that sense of mystery and foreshadow as well. So lots of things here that hopefully are applicable to the genre that you're writing in. And the final of the 6 ingredients I wanted to talk through in terms of what makes great dialogue is character motivation. With a lot of writing, you want it to feel like it has an intention behind it. And especially in dialogue, when we see that brought to the speech, it makes it purposeful. And this example is from Ian Rankin's Rebus series. It's really interesting here because we've mentioned a little earlier on about the idea that dialogue is like tennis, that it's reaction to an action, it's a back and forth. Actually, in this extract, you can see that the characters are talking to each other, but they're slightly at crossed purposes. So it's very economic dialogue, I would say, that not a word is wasted. It shows how actually being succinct can have really strong impact, that not a word is wasted, everything serves a purpose. It's very direct, it gives it a great snappy rhythm, again feeling propulsive and moving this forward. What's really interesting here is that the dialogue doesn't actually need to tell us information. We see Rebus inferring from what he hears that his colleague sounds like she's outdoors. It also does a really great job of placing a person, and I think so many of us will be familiar with the James Bond line, and you can see this used to great effect here, that actually a lot of times when we do place people, it is by that name, full name beat. But what's really interesting about this is I think we have Rebus, who is recognizing that something is wrong, whereas his colleague wants to find out more information about Andy. In this exchange in particular, you can really see how each character is bringing their own motivation to the conversation in terms of the information they want to find out. So you see that she's asking Rebus to describe Andy. Rebus immediately is asking what happened and then where she is. So this dialogue works so well because it has an intention behind it from each of the characters. I really hope that is another, again, interesting example of things you can start to hopefully take away from our session today and implement in your own dialogue. So now we've looked at the key ingredients that make up good dialogue. They're reflecting the tone and setting of your book. They're making sure that dialogue advances the plot, that dialogue conveys emotions, that it establishes characters' personalities. It can use subtext, and also that each character brings an intention to the conversation. So now you have 6 key ingredients to elevate your dialogue. How can you move these moving forward? Well, I think the first thing to say is actually that it can be really difficult to write good dialogue from the off in a first draft. I think with dialogue especially, it can be quite common that you overwrite it, or it could end up that it veers towards filler dialogue while you're still feeling your way. So after you have a first draft, how can you edit your dialogue to hopefully continue to feel like you're honing your craft? And in this section, I've tried to pick out a few key tips that you can take away from today to edit your own work as you continue to hone your craft, and also touching on some of the common pitfalls that can affect your dialogue and make it not ring true, as it were. So obviously I have talked at you for a length of time now. If that was in a book, it would be pages of speech and someone just speaking, which is not the most natural thing in the world. I think it's something that can easily happen in dialogue, that you can slip into giving us a lot of speech in one go, the character speaking at length. So a tip hopefully that helps you identify this as the starting point is to highlight speech. So as you can see on the slide here, this example, there is actually quite a nice balance to the dialogue. It's a line at a time. It's nicely spaced out with action beats between it. But if you were to do this in your own novel and then see that your dialogue came as a chunk of text on the page, that's where I would start to push yourself a little bit more to try and hone it further. And if you do see, once you've highlighted the dialogue, that there is an imbalance in your speech, either a character monopolizing speech, or perhaps in an interaction, one character speaking at length, just a line from the other character that they're talking to, the best way you can do improvements to this is breaking up the chunk of dialogue. I would recommend, when you've identified that by highlighting, think about how you can use dialogue tags or reactions or action beats from the person speaking or even the person listening to make it feel more naturally paced. And immediately that will hopefully have the effect of making it seem more natural. You will break up a big block of dialogue on the page, because I think quite often when readers see that, our eye almost skims over it a little bit. So it's something that you definitely want to avoid. And I think when you are so close to a novel or non-fiction you're writing, it can be hard to see things afresh. So that's why I'd recommend highlighting your speech. If you have a couple of characters in conversation, you could do a different colour per character. It's a really easy way to just see it afresh on the page and that interaction between them. So you have the tennis effect, as it were. I think when we've talked about the temptation to have big chunks of dialogue, a lot of it sometimes stems from the next tip I'm going to give you, which is where we are tempted to just give information in dialogue as a big chunk, and you can be repeating perhaps what the reader already knows. If it's okay to move on to the next slide, Martin, that would be brilliant. Thank you so much. So you'll see we have this really great tip here about reading your dialogue to hear how it sounds out loud. There's a really great quote from Anne Tyler, who is another literary titan, shall we say, but she gives a really great tip, which is sometimes her favourite writers, when she reads their dialogue, it doesn't quite ring true. And I think that can be really effective. If you want dialogue to sound natural, the best way to do that is by sounding it out yourself. It's only perhaps when we read it out loud that we might realise actually that it doesn't quite ring true. Maybe it doesn't reflect how your character speaks or their personality. Maybe it doesn't quite have that natural rhythm that you were trying to achieve. So hopefully this is a great way of sounding that out. And as you speak it out loud, you might realise the places where it slightly falls down for you. And then you can tweak according to how it feels more natural to speak it. Again, making it reflect natural speech rhythms in that way that you are trying to craft that. So I hope that is quite a fun one. Obviously, maybe not in your local cafe or wherever you write, but hopefully it's a good way to hear it afresh, or even getting somebody to read it out loud to you so you can hear it in a different way rather than it scans on the page. And moving on to our next tip, it can be really easy, I think, for dialogue to feel flat, for want of a better phrase, and that's because it could be two people talking and they never really seem to move, which doesn't always reflect natural patterns. So as you're reading through, keep an eye out to see, is there any movement in that conversation? Does it seem like people are just standing still? And again, depending on the subject of what they're talking about, does that mean that it doesn't quite ring true? Because it won't sit right with a reader if we feel like someone is having a really impassioned conversation and they just stand there. So think about, if you're a visual person, what you see when you are watching, your favourite film or TV drama, and how an actor brings a role to life. It might be through body language, it might be through gestures. It will make your scene seem more active and dynamic. And you also want to make sure that if you are adding gestures and body language, that they are in keeping with the tone of what is being said. So for an example, if a character is feeling confused, a really great way to signify that is probably through a frown, because our brow naturally creases. If there's tension between characters, maybe you want to have somebody snapping, maybe somebody paces, or they're angry, so they stand up and they try and let out that energy. Their tone, for example, might also become louder. So really focus as you perhaps read back your own work as to the dialogue tags in it and whether they are keeping your dialogue feeling natural and as if it would be acted out on the screen, I think is hopefully another good piece of advice. And then moving on to dialogue tags. There's quite a lot of conflicting information about dialogue tags. I'm sure that as we maybe move on to questions later, a fair few might come up. And actually, I think I could have spent today's session alone talking about dialogue tags because there's so much to say on them. But the one thing I would urge you to do as you start to build your self-editing toolkit, as it were, is to keep a close eye on dialogue tags, because quite often it can be the element that trips writers up. We don't need he said, she said after every line, but you really need to make sure that you are using enough dialogue tags so that it is clear who is speaking. So I've added a little mini checklist here of questions to bear in mind when you're thinking about dialogue tags. Is it clear who's speaking? Well, if it's not, you might need to use dialogue tags more often. If you have a character after every line, then actually we don't need all of those either, because it will be easy to infer kind of that rhythm and that back and forth. So we don't need it overstated, as it were. You'll also want to think, as we were just talking about, whether the tags and the actions reflect the emotion of a scene. If they don't, maybe that's something you need to bring more intonation to your writing so that it feels authentic. It's really easy with dialogues too to slip into repetition. If you have repeated a lot of dialogue tags, you might see a lot of saids or asks in a row, in which case you might want to delete some of those tags or use alternatives just to vary your writing and make sure that your reader doesn't subconsciously start to skim over those lines. And I know that on Reedsy, there's actually a really helpful blog with a list of alternatives so you can build your own thesaurus, which is handy when it comes to dialogue tags. So I hope that these few tips in particular on dialogue tags are helpful, because I know it's one of the biggest challenges that writers face when it comes to dialogue. So I'm aware that we have covered quite a lot so far, and I hope that as a writer you feel that you can be like a sponge and soak up, everything you can, because tips do come from anywhere. I really appreciate that you have taken the time to join us today, and I hope that you will have gotten a lot of useful things that you can take away. But before we move on to questions, I wanted to just share some further tips. If you've enjoyed this talk, which I hope you have, and you want to do more, I've got a couple of suggestions on this slide about things you could start to put into practice besides what we've talked about. So I do think that, the best writers are sponges. We're constantly absorbing information and ideas and thinking about how to apply those to our work. So the first thing I would recommend is a little bit like the examples I shared on the slide. Study the dialogue in your favourite books. Maybe you might want to annotate it or write it out, and think about, why does it work well? What is it that you like about it that makes it effective? Equally, there might be dialogue that you think doesn't work that well, so that can also be interesting to look at to see what's not quite working for you. What would you have done differently? And hopefully highlighting those passages, taking a moment to analyze and dig a bit deeper might give you ideas into techniques that some writers have used effectively, which you might want to try in your own writing. The second thing I'm recommending is the classic, if you write in a coffee shop, listen to the conversations around you. I think it's such a rich source of inspiration for so many people. Being able to listen to the conversations, how they go back and forth, what you might want to do, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this, but without perhaps recording a conversation word for word that you've heard, perhaps later on you can use it as inspiration for a short writing exercise, maybe coming up with characters based on people you might have seen in a coffee shop that day or when you've been out and about. And I would try and reimagine that conversation on the page, trying to capture the different characters. We've talked about how to do that in terms of the language that characters do, how to differentiate maybe through tone, through gestures, through body language. And you can also make sure in that scene that maybe we see a dynamic between the two characters play out too, just like the conversations you're probably hearing, which can hopefully serve as rich inspiration. And the final tip that I hope is almost like a fun homework prompt is to go and watch films, because script writers are, of course, masters at dialogue. They have perfected it and it is finely crafted so that no minute in a script is wasted. That dialogue always serves a purpose. I've included a link, and I know Martin's been kind enough to share it too. There's a great blog here, and it's got 15 films, a variety of genres. And I think it's really nice because the blog also picks out why they think it's so great, some kind of key tips. So hopefully, if now it is getting colder in the UK anyway, you want to bunker down with a film, hopefully there are some great tips that you can take away. And again, maybe if you're a visual person or being able to hear dialogue out loud, that will hopefully help you pick up on natural rhythms. If you're seeing how actors perform dialogue, what works well in terms of those body language, gestures, or tone, and it can hopefully breathe new life into your dialogue. So I hope that the further tips, as well as everything else we've covered today, have been really helpful takeaways. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening, and hopefully now we'll be able to answer as many questions as we can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. The link I said I was going to drop there, that website is actually down, which is why I haven't shared it. So it was down yesterday. It seems to still be down. The information is so good that they're trying to keep it secret.
No.
But I'll check again tomorrow, and then when I send the follow-up email, if it's back up, I'll share that link there. Otherwise, I'm sure, there are other great resources there. Okay, some people have been sending questions in already, but feel free to add them. We'll make through as many as we can just here. There was some chat in the comments about single quotes and double quotes. We sort of mentioned that I think single quotes is more common in the UK and doubles are in the US. From your perspective, when you're working in a book that gets published in both territories, do they change those around?
Yeah, that's one thing actually. It does differ slightly depending on where you are in the world. So there's different preferences for US-based writers that normally it's double. For a lot of UK houses, it is single quotation marks that are used. What I would say is do not stress. I think the most important thing with any formatting with dialogue is actually that you're just consistent. So as this example, double quotes for speech, single quotes for thought, that's perfect. If you use single quotes for speech, you might want to use italics to denote thought. Whatever you do, as long as you are consistent, that is the main thing.
Cool. We have one here from Catherine who's asking, italics for inner dialogue? That's fairly common, right?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant way to denote interiority from your character, and I think it works particularly effectively. Actually, we've talked about dialogue between characters, but I think in that situation, if you have a character who can't voice their feelings at that moment, that's where the italics for the inner dialogue can work really well, especially if a character is maybe angry at what's been said or they're feeling overwhelmed. So yeah, I think that's a really great idea, Catherine, to hopefully implement.
There's Joe. Anyway, Joe, perhaps ask about monologue, whether the character really is giving a speech. This has been in the chats as well. I think whenever a character is maybe relating a story or doing a big speech, I guess it's not a hard and fast rule that they cannot monologue. But are there other alternatives? Is there a downside to having the character just sort of speak in massive paragraphs and pages?
Yeah, I think it does depend, I guess, on the situation in your specific scene that you're writing. I think even if you are having a character speak at length, there are perhaps things you can do so that you don't just have, like you're saying, Martin, like paragraphs of speech for, a page or two at a time. I would really recommend in that case that you think about how you use dialogue tags, whether it is from the person speaking and perhaps they pause, they draw for breath, they take a minute to compose themselves, especially in the example you mentioned, if someone is relaying a story or maybe a memory, there could be emotions that are surfacing as part of that they're grappling with. You can also break it up slightly by maybe having reaction from the person or people that are listening. Even if they are relaying something in dialogue, do they have to say it all in one go? Could they maybe say something, and then could there be a question that someone asks to prompt, the next part of the thought and the next story? So I think a few things like that could actually just finesse that even further, so it does still retain what you want it to do, but it's done in a way that doesn't feel unnatural. And I think as a reader, always remember how you feel when you see things on the page. I know for me, sometimes if I see huge sections of italics or brackets, my eye scans. I think sometimes the same with dialogue. If we as readers see huge chunks, we'll probably start scanning. And obviously, what you're saying is important. So make the reader feel like it is important and that they are there. So I hope those tips help to break up the speech, to retain the information you need to relay, but also do it in a way that feels more natural, perhaps.
And also, yeah, the other ways I think as well, like you'll have bits where you will go into summary within the narration, like have bits of the monologue in there, and then within an authentic, actual discussion, someone might be going on for ages to talk about, especially when it's things that the reader already knows. You don't want to have to repeat it all, so you can sort of summarize that in there. And I've seen ones where a character's about to go into a monologue or tell a long story and it cuts into a different scene. You almost get taken into that story and it gets written from that perspective. We have other questions coming in. Noel, when writing in a group setting, it's kind of unavoidable to repeat names a few times in the tags. Any advice for tips on that? I suppose, yeah, if you have a room full of 5 people all arguing and discussing, that can get a bit messy, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, hopefully, a fun challenge, though, to try and implement some of the tips that we've talked about today. I would just be mindful, because it might be that a couple of characters are speaking. Maybe someone is sat quietly listening, so that could be made clear, so that perhaps a first part of the conversation might be between a couple of characters and we don't need a dialogue tag after every line. As we talked about a little bit, you don't always need that they said or that they asked to mix it up and make it feel more dynamic. You can add the gestures or the body language as action beats. So even when you're talking about the group setting and perhaps things feeling like they're getting complicated or messy, a good way for a reader still to be able to picture the scene more clearly and what's going on is actually to use those to make it feel natural, to still make sure that all the groups seem to be there. So I'm hoping that helps. And again, maybe it's also having someone else read it for you or coming back to it to see, as a fresh pair of eyes, does this all make sense? Is there anything that is repeated that doesn't need to be there? equally, if I'm coming to this fresh, would I know who is speaking, or is every character there and are they reacting in some way at some point?
Cool. We have a question here from Bev Bradpool. Hi. How do you write in dialect or accents without making it annoying for readers to understand? Thanks, Brad from Swindon.
Oh, that's such a good question. I love that, Brad, because what you want to do is retain that authenticity and establish the character, but still make it accessible for a reader. I'm actually from Sheffield, so I know sometimes that when my friends see Yorkshire dialect on the page, they find it really hard to follow. A tip I would give actually in this case is perhaps pick one or two words in particular that are in that strong dialect that give a flavour, as it were, that you can use to give the character's personality and background without overdoing it. So if it is just one or two words in a section of speech, it has the effect of making it seem like it is in a local dialect, but without making it hard for someone not familiar with that to understand, if that makes sense, hopefully.
Cool. Let's see. We have Janice asking, how do people punctuate and format text and email communication? That must be a more common thing these days, where characters text each other and have entire conversations. I guess there is no standard way, but what are some of the ways you've seen?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you're right that it's going to be more and more common because actually now maybe dialogue isn't in person. It could be exchanges that are over text or email. I actually think if you are doing that, then I would format it differently to dialogue. I don't think you would need to have, the kind of dialogue tags that we talked about and for it to be in quotation marks. I would actually, if you have people sending an email, I would format it as an email in the kind of body of your manuscript. If you're having an exchange of text, I don't think actually that we do need, I text, they replied. You can just have the line by line, almost a bit more like a script. I think it's something that we're familiar with. It might just be character name, colon, the message that they send if it's a text exchange. And I think it just makes it cleaner, easier to follow. The only thing you might want to consider in terms of formatting is if you are having those exchanges, is there a moment where maybe a character reacts to what they're reading that you want to insert? So again, it might have more impact, it might convey emotion. But yeah, I hope that helps, Janice, with how you can format text and emails in particular.
Cool. We've got one here from Papson Uno. What is your opinion on adverbs? Example, she said slowly, he said loudly. Also, this is my book coach and she is awesome.
Thanks, Anna Nicole. So great you joined us. Yes, so adverbs are a whole other, can of worms that we could open. I would say that they can be really effective if they are serving a point of intonation and establishing a character's personality. I think where they can be most effective actually is if there's something slightly surprising about the way it's said. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe if in a crime novel, if a character said something that is quite menacing, but actually they say it softly, I think there's something about that piques our interest because it's not, if someone is shouting, for example, we don't need to know that they said it loudly. I think with adverbs, the way they have impact is when it does something unexpected and it draws our attention to that. So maybe we are left to question a character's motivation or a dynamic between characters. I think, again, as we've talked about with dialogue tags, I would recommend using it sparingly. And I think with dialogue tags, whether it's adverbs or tags in general, you can be succinct. So you probably don't need to say, for example, they said smiling. You could have just they smiled. And again, I think it's small tweaks like that that as you go back and edit your own work, they can add that extra layer of finesse, which is really hard when you're writing. So I think a lot of the tips I've given today are definitely more focused on reading through your own work, I would say. But yeah, I think adverbs can work well. Be mindful about how often you use them. Make sure that if you are using them, they tell us something that we wouldn't know or expect, perhaps, I think is the best way to think of them.
Cool. We have a question here from Praxis Forum. Any advice for when writing something more like a memoir?
Yeah, I think my background is in fiction, so sorry that the examples were from across fiction genres. I think when you're writing dialogue in memoir, similar rules apply, to be honest, because you need to think of the um, characters, the people as characters, as it were. So if you are trying to remember a conversation, try to bring the emotions to that conversation, convey emotion, maybe try and remember the intention behind it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything necessarily that I can think off the top of my head that would be different. Yeah, it should still feel dynamic. The people should feel like characters and probably come alive in that moment, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we had someone on who was a memoir writer, and yeah, it's difficult because it is non-fiction, and then you could be stuck in that place where it's like, I don't remember precisely how they said it, and so you may feel bad about inventing dialogue. Whereas I think the thing that they said is, a memoir is an account of like the story as I remember it, and so you're under no sort of legal obligation to get every single word they said right in the right order. You have a duty of care to your own readers in that sense and to the story you're trying to tell. Let's see, I think we get a couple more before we pop off. Oh, Kevin Paler asks, what about pre-tags like Martin colon blah blah, Katie colon? That is, I've seen it used in some places, but it's not common. Like, what do you think the effect of something like that would be?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because I think a lot of times I would think that dialogue tags add something that we don't know from the line itself. So I think it's harder to do that before because if you are giving us the tone before we've read it, does it sometimes preempt what we're about to read? I think it can be a really tricky balance, whereas I think it is more natural to have the line of dialogue and then a tag or a reaction rather than preempting. I suppose it depends what's been said. You might want to vary it at points, and it might be that if it's an action tag or a gesture, like we've talked about, that those action beats do come before the line, and you can vary it in that way to help the pacing and rhythm of your writing. But I would just be careful, I suppose, if it is, Martin screamed, for example, because if we know something bad has happened before the line, it maybe doesn't quite have the same impact as if it's delivered the other way around. Yeah, and I would say have an experiment if you're never quite sure to see what works best. Maybe it's just a small section, you do it in the way you suggested, you try almost inverting it and see the effect that that has instead.
Yeah, like Joe here says, this style would read with the grace and style of a court case transcript. But if that's the intended effect, if you're trying to create sort of distance between the characters and what's happening there and the reader, like it can have that effect. But I imagine like a whole book of this could become like quite hard to read. Like I suppose the sort of form of how we punctuate and sort of stylize all dialogue is designed to be easy to read. Everyone is used to reading it. You don't necessarily want to have to teach all your readers how to read your book. And I think that's probably, it's not like a hard and fast rules, you must do this because otherwise the publishing gods will frown upon you. It's just like, this is what your reader knows, that's how they know to, the way they know how to absorb a story. Cool, and I think that could be the end of it. Katie, as we mentioned, you are a professional on Reedsy. What sorts of collaborations are you particularly excited by these days?
Oh, I love working on Reedsy. I get to work with so many amazing writers. So I offer development edit and editorial assessment services on Reedsy. I work with, as you saw from a lovely writer who popped up in our questions, I work as a book coach for writers, and I also offer query package reviews. I focus on fiction across genres. I love, romantasy, which is going to sweep me away and has great chemistry. I love book club novels. I love cozy crime. So yeah, you can find more on my profile on the marketplace. I think the one thing I love is working with writers longer term. I have worked with people on Reedsy who come to me with an idea in the first instance, and then through book coaching, we work on structure, they write their first draft, and we work right through editing to even them being ready to query agents. So it is amazing and always really inspiring to see the hard work of writers and how it pays off. So yeah, that's one of my favourite things about the people that I get to work with on the platform.
Great. And you can find her profile at reedsy.com/Katie-Seaman. Katie, thank you so much for doing this. Have we got you booked up for anything else later next month or something?
Yeah, I am joining for anyone that's attending. I think it's in a couple of weeks, the Getting Published conference, I think 16th of November. Yeah, so I'll be back again to talk to everyone a little bit more about what editors are looking for, and hopefully that will be another great session. Thank you everyone for joining and for your brilliant questions. I hope it's been really helpful for you.
Fantastic. And Reedsy, the Novel Sprint 2025 steams on. We'll be seeing everyone for more of these. Every Wednesday there's going to be a new guest with a big presentation, but Tuesdays and Fridays we have our mini writing sprints. I won't be at the one on Friday, but my colleague Savannah, she'll be taking care of that one with our other guest Rebecca Van Leer, author of Cat from Bloomsbury's Object Lesson series. It's a great place to just sort of meet up, share your progress, and get some writing done. Katie, I want to thank you once more for joining us. It's been such a pleasure, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!
Thank you.